Plus, if you make him mad, he's got a cane now. He can smack you.
Well, I got one I can duel him with.
I guess it just.
That would be our first on-camera cane duel.
Right.
Okay,
They
whenever
would-
you're ready.
Okay, we're ready to go. Alright, so if we could just start out by having you say your name and then spell it for us.
Sure. My name is Edwin Cheyney, Cheyney. It's also been pronounced Cheyney, but with the extra Y in it. I was corrected many years ago that you're pronouncing it wrong.
Really?
And
So
then
you learned about it.
And I said, I didn't care as long as it didn't get any worse.
Fair enough. My name's Laura Arata. Today is November 12th, 2013, and we're conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. So I wonder if we could start off by just having you tell me a little bit about when you came to Hanford and what that first experience of coming to Hanford was like and why you initially came here.
Okay, well, first of all, at that time I was going to Spokane Technical and Vocational School, which is now Spokane Community College, and basically the only way you could get out of class time is to go interview. Well, I was on it's 3.5 years, and so I was on actually the last few months of my course, and this guy says, hey, let's get a carpool going and go down to Hanford. Where's that? And says, well, they're looking for employees. I think it was 13 at that time for a special program with General Electric. So we get down there, and the first thing, and we got here early, at 7 o'clock promptly, we were all escorted back into a room that had separate booths, and we were give time tests. From 7 o'clock till 12 noon, we were tested on about every kind of conceivable test that I could imagine, but it all related to my field of electronics and instrumentation. So anyway, it was about 2 weeks later, the ones that were in the carpool with me said they already got the rejection notice. And my teacher, I wasn't one of his favorite ones, and he just says, came to me and says, well, you'll get yours. And I says, well, I'm sure I will. A month later, I get a call from my grandmother. I was living in Spokane and taking care of 2 of her apartment houses, and she says, you've got a registered letter. So I went to my teacher and I says, I need to take my grandmother to the bank. He says, I've never heard of that one before. So he let me go, and I got there, and I had a registered letter from General Electric. I really got excited, and it says, offered me a job, and I went back to the school. I plopped it down to the teacher and says, well, there, I got my letter. He said, so what? And just turned his head. So, well, that's fine. At least I got proof. And I went to my 2 other instructors from previous years. They stopped everything. They said, look, he's the only one out of the whole school that's been offered a job down at Hanford. I still didn't know what I was getting into. But I figured it was worth it. And we had to agree to the fact to go to 3.5 years more to CBC to special programs that GE selected. And that was no problem either. And then we worked only an 8-hour shift, except on weekends we could work overtime if that case came up. So basically, that's how I got in the front door. And it's sort of interesting that when I first came down here, my mother wanted to make sure that I got in a decent environment because I'd never cooked or anything. And so GE, they'd recommended the best place where most go is the Statler Hotel. Well, I thought, well, let's go there. Oh, we went in there, my mother, of course, with me. When she saw that the 3 gals there were in mini skirts and all things, she almost ripped my arm off, says, this isn't the place for you. And it was, I didn't see any problem with it, but she immediately took me up to the parish house and says, is there somewhere decent that I can live? And she introduced us to this woman that was very motherly, very heavy set, very good cook, and said she'd board and room me. Well, of course, I got out on the project. There was lots and lots of indoctrinations that this is classified work and you're not to discuss anything whatsoever. And the home that I was staying in, the her husband was one of the managers out at D Reactor. And so the first thing he asked me, he says, what do you do out there? I just work out there. He says, I know you can't describe anything, but he says, you can at least say your title. You're not getting yourself in trouble with that. I says, well, are you sure? He says, I wouldn't put you on the spot. And I says, I'm an instrument and control technician. And so he didn't push me any further. And one thing, before I left the neighborhood of Spokane, the FBI was checking up on me. And I had neighbors saying, what kind of trouble are you in anyway? And I says, what do you mean, trouble? And they says, the FBI was out checking on you. And I said, that's great. He says, what's great about it? I says, I think they're interested in me. So that's basically how I got in the front door. And I started in the 300 area, basically the canning lines. And with GE, you were only in a spot roughly 3 months to 6 months, and they rotated you because they wanted you to get the full feel of the different expectations that they had of you and the way you could handle your so-called position as far as instrument control and calibration of all kinds of instrumentation, which to me I found really exciting because it was a new challenge. Seemed like there was never a day that it wasn't something different. And I like that, and the challenges were quite different. But and riding that bus for a nickel a day, you couldn't afford to drive anywhere. The only thing is, those buses didn't have air conditioning or anything. And when it started, when they moved me to the K reactors, well, first it was B, C reactors. When you had 100-degree weather, it was no fun after shift getting on the bus about 4 o'clock. It's good and hot and everything. About all you could do is just sit there and bear it. I usually just closed my eyes and just figured, well, I'll get home pretty quick. And I just figured, well, it's good for a common cause. And also at that time, the salary was real good for someone that was just out of a tech school. My dad had a master's degree, was teaching 5 solid subjects in the superintendent of schools at Hoagland, Montana. And the first year, because I was living with the landladies, their home, she also made use of me to take me to grocery stores to help her carry stuff. And she took me to Zales and talked me into buying a men's diamond ring, which that was the last thing in the world I was really interested in, but I got talked into it. Well, I go up to see my dad, and he sees that. He says, is that real? And I says, of course it's real. But I says, it was stupid that I bought it, and I took it off. He says, you can have it. He says, well, what kind of money are you making? At that point in time, I had made a little over $2,500 more than he'd made. And that really changed his whole attitude about tech school, because when I graduated from school, I had to be in his classes, and I took lots of insults. And when he asked me, when I graduated, what are you going to do? I says, I'm not sure yet. He says, and then when I told him I was going to tech school, he says, you just well be a grease monkey. Well, that changed his whole attitude, that maybe, he says, I just can't see why and how they can pay you that kind of money. I says, Dad, they pay you for what you can do with your hands too. And from then on, he had a whole different feel about it. So that's getting off of what I was doing at Hanford. But going to the different sites, like I say, the challenges were always different. And I think the thing that really impressed me the most is the feeling of the power and energy that was going on. And especially when I was given the tour to go first up to the water treatment plant. That was massive enough, I was told, could easily take care of the whole state of Los Angeles. And they showed me the wet well, and in it was all these lights with no insulation or anything, and they're on. He says, how come they don't short out? He says, in pure water, there's no conduction. And the mass of water that was going down through the pumps and through the reactor core itself, the ground just vibrated. I'd say it was at least a good 2 city blocks, if not longer. You just feel the rumbling, and it's just a massive power. and you go in the reactor area, you just hear all this rush of water. Another thing that was impressive, you look outdoors at those big million-gallon tanks of boiling water coming right off the reactor. It could be 100 degrees outdoors, and it had a 200-foot plume at least. And it really made me think, especially in later years when you start realizing what all was going on. It was a graphite core reactor, same kind of reactor that Chernobyl had. They were foolish in what they were doing. They weren't using nuclear engineers or physicists and doing all kinds of dangerous experiments. But it reminded me that when I went in to watch, and a lot of times we referred to it, we're controlling a nuclear bomb. And when operations, especially at operations, they started pulling rods, waiting for things to go critical. It got real exciting and real quiet, and they had 2 to 3 guys watching everything, all the instrumentation, to see when things are starting to go critical. And it just really amazed me how smart they were and how careful they were in their operations. And at the same token, it made you well aware of that we're really controlling something really massive. And later, roughly, like I say, about every 6 months or so, they rotated you. They moved me to the K reactors. Now, those were the 2 world's largest producing plutonium reactors, and that was even more exciting. Of course, a whole lot bigger and a whole lot more things going on. And eventually, I don't know if it was because of my interest or or my attitude or what, they gave me the opportunity to go into the irradiation testing group, which was a whole lot more involvement, and that was going into, I won't go into a whole lot of detail. They were putting, I'll say, samples into the core of the reactor during operation for different tests for Atomic International, NASA, and there was a few others, but they had a lot of instrumentation monitoring and analyzing what's going on. Of course, because of being rotated around, actually what happened then was I just became journeyman, and General Electric announced that they're phasing out. That was a real scary thing for the simple fact they were laying off thousands of people, not hundreds. And being that I was on their special training program, they had an agreement with the union only take a certain percentage of us to lay off and go off, like they lay off 2,000 workers. They might take 3 or 4 of us. But when it got down to the last 2 weeks of General Electric, I was down in the last group. Now, when they put me in that status, then they immediately transferred me out of the K reactors down to the canning lines. And that's where they actually had, what I want to say, molten metal for sealing the canisters for the fuel for the reactor. And so when you knew when you were down there that you were on your way out. Well, on Friday, the last Friday of the second week of GE, I got my layoff notice. Well, this probably about does it, but I put in my name. I thought, well, I want to stay nuclear. I put my name for the nuclear bomb testing down in Nevada. I immediately got results back. We'd like to hire you. And the only thing is, they're offering me basically the same salary, but I had to move myself. And I thought, well, heck with that. The following Monday, so I got a notice on Friday. The following Monday, my supervisor comes to me and he says, how would you like to work for Douglas United Nuclear? I says, I'd love to work for Douglas United Nuclear. He says, well, you'd be doing the same thing you're doing, and so tear up your layoff notice. So I stayed with Douglas United Nuclear, not to go into a whole lot of details of the same thing. It wasn't long, they announced shutting down more reactors. The handwriting was on the wall. You aren't going to be here very long. And so I put my name in with Battelle Northwest, and I put my name with KEPR TV station, because at school I had earned a commercial FCC license, so I could go that way. I thought, all right, I'll get out of government, I'll go into this. Well, it was on a Thursday night. I got called by both Battelle and by KEPR, and I said, well, I wanted to Battelle. I told them I wanted to just check into this one job first. Well, it turned out real quick that didn't have anywhere near what to offer the Battelle, so I went to Battelle. Through Battelle, then I got into a whole lot more avenues of the nuclear field, and they moved me everywhere where they felt that they wanted me or needed me. I worked first. They were going to move me out in the areas, or that's what they promised me. And the first day on the job, they put me in the 300 area again, in the fabrications department. Well, Battelle's in everything. And the next thing, I was assigned on an engineer. He basically give you a schematic or drawing of what he wanted, and you had to, from there, get everything you need, put it together, wire it up, test it, and turn it over to the engineer. Well, that was really exciting because it was a whole different challenge, including making your own printed circuit boards, which I'd never done. Basically, it's a photographic process, and I've always been interested in that. And so it wasn't long. They wanted that engineering department then wanted me and moved me down to the sandcastle. And of course, so when they have a contract that ends, so does the job. But in the meantime, they had the computer lab at the sandcastle for the FFTF mock-up. And I guess my understanding was the first time ever they had analog digital computers working together to simulate FFTF. That went great until Governor Dixie Lee Ray came down and removed that responsibility from Battelle. Well, I got moved out into the 300 area again in different labs, and HTLTR, PRTR, and all the different ones. But again, every one of them was exciting. Every one was a different challenge. Well, in the meantime, there was a gentleman that got hurt at home, and he worked out the 200 areas, and that was top secret work. And so that required having more checks on me. And then when you were approved, you had a blue tag on your badge. The only thing that I really feel comfortable disclosing was the fact that, again, it was really exciting. The big thing was that they assigned you to specific cells only, and no one had the same cells, and no one was, basically I was told, because this way you'll never try to put things together. You just do your job and mind your own business. And that's fine with me. And then as soon as this gentleman was able to come back to work, then I was put on with, they asked me if I'd like to work at the weather station. That's out at the 200 areas also. That I was to work on the telemetry stations. I thought that's really neat because they had weather stations on a 65-mile radius that I traveled every day, checking stations and setting them up for monitoring radiation, temperature, wind speed, and etc. And the only thing is, it was a great adventure watching or being at the different areas, and that's when it came to my light that I didn't realize that during the time I was out in the 100 areas, I don't know when because I never saw it, that they had Nike missile sites. And where that refreshed my memory is when I was out at K areas one night on graveyard shift, and I was with a gentleman, and we were out outside, and we just got through. They had stack flow monitors to see what kind of effluents are going through to make sure we're staying within limits. And he says, you know, it was really sort of funny. One night, he wouldn't say who, and I can see why, inflated a big air balloon and a weather balloon and tied a flashlight to it and set it up. Well, after it went up so far, the next thing, I think 2 military jets came flying over to see what the heck that was flying in the air. So some people had ways of, no one wanted to be identified on that one because they did have missile sites. I found that when I was on my weather station, is out at the Waluki Slopes, but they pretty well destroyed everything. And I thought, this was really, really, was pretty well covered and protected. which thank God it was, but we weren't aware of that stuff. So it was full of excitement, and I never knew what I was going to be stuck with the next day. The only thing is, like with Battelle, and that's while I was doing the weather stations, I was watching one of the sites I had was right out on the Hanford site, and it was right out there where they were starting up whoops, and they were digging this massive hole in the ground, and we had to set up a weather station there. And so I got really interested in that, and basically I thought, I've always wanted to see something like this being built from the ground up. So that's I put my name in there, and 3 months later I was hired in and spent last 27 and a half years there. But that's basically in a nutshell what I was involved with.
Sounds like you were involved in a lot of different jobs, and I wonder, you mentioned that you worked at BC and K reactors, so I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what some of your different jobs there were, whatever you're comfortable.
Oh, sure. Well, especially in the BC reactor areas, like I say, while I was going to school, you weren't allowed any overtime, but on weekends, you were. Another interesting thing, while living, when you're back home, if they wanted you, like for a reactor goes down, they call you up, you say yes, they send a person out in a car, they pick you up and take you out there, and they also bring you back home. Some of those jobs, I actually was out at the plant for 2 days at a time. But one of them, like in the BC reactor, especially now that we can go visit and everything, it brought back the recollection of the reactor had gone down, and they were doing repair of thermocouples, that's temperature measurement, and you had to go to the rear face of that reactor in a wetsuit, and of course PC's under that, and go in there and go behind where those tubes are, pull out this two conductor wire, and take and cut it, splice it, and basically bond it together, and then solder it there. And here you got water's dripping from 100 feet up. You're trying to heat this thing up enough to make it bond, and then call the control room. Now are they getting an indication? And then of course you'd have to reinsert it back down into the well it was in. That was one of the things I'll never forget, because it was so dark back then and everything. You did not want to be claustrophobic. It was you could easily touch the back of the wall with your back. You'd yet have the tubes in front of you. And of course the interesting thing there is before anyone ever goes in there after a shutdown, they discharge all those tubes down into 15 feet of water, and you see all this blue glowing down there below you. That never bothered me either, other than thank God it's down 15 feet underwater. Well, in the K reactors, the B reactor, I just had a lot of general routines of, like in the powerhouse, there's all kinds of instrumentation for controlling those big boilers. Of course, that was coal-fired, and the water treatment facilities, measuring the pH of the water and the chemistry that goes into it. And then K reactors, I got to go in. They were putting in a high-speed scanning system for measuring temperature. And instead of using thermocouples, they used RTDs. And they were going into, I think it was about a second year I was at K reactors, that again, they shut down to replace all of those. Well, again, I get called, I come out there, it's at midnight, I'm well over 100 feet up in the air, running these thermal bulbs down through in between the tubes while there's another guy riding the elevator down to the point of what tube it was to be installed into. And it was sort of relaxing up there. It was interesting, but it just seemed like forever. Another incident, of course, as soon as you finish your college requirements that they put on, I was immediately put on D shift, and it just I didn't like shift because it was 1 day a week, one day a week, swings, days, and graveyards. on a continuous cycle. But it's still, I was with a technician this one day. We were up in full operation at this point in time, but they were wanting to check, they were having problems, and so he and I were assigned to go into the control room. They had, I won't give the exact number, I'll say there was well over 3,000 pressure gauges called panelect gauges. They're monitoring the pressure of the water of the tube itself, and that's 3,000 plus. And this panel, you're in the control room, you hear all this click, 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 and they're all moving. If any one of them goes over pressure or under pressure, immediately it dumps that whole complete plant. Everything comes through a massive, you hear lots of equipment slamming shut and the control rods drop. Well, anyway, I guess I was still considered a trainee at that time. We had to change out one of those low pressure gauges. Behind the panel, it's all full of tubing and wiring. They're all in series with each other, so it means if anyone's interrupted, it dumps everything. So to get around that, to replace a gauge, you had jumpers. So you put a jumper and you jumper out that gauge, and then when you're all ready to try to dismantle and pull it out and put another one, you pull the jumpers out of it. Well, the gentleman that was taking me through this showed me and telling me how careful. As soon as he pulled the one jumper, boom, the plant went down. Oh, no, I don't know what color I turned, but I know that he said, oh, no. He went out and says, we did it. I said, they says, hold on. And they were checking. It turned out it was something else, but it happened at the same time that we pulled that jumper. So there was times that it made you plenty nervous, because you don't make anyone happy if you dump the plant. You don't get fired, but the embarrassment of it, you try to take a lot more pride in it than that. And so that's basically sort of in a nutshell with BC reactors. It's real interesting to go out there and look at it now, and I certainly encourage anyone that has the opportunity. It brings back a lot of memories. The biggest thing I remember is you go in the control room there, the first one that they let off. You go in the control room there, it looks like a little dinky space. It didn't seem that dinky to me then. But if you go into the K reactors, it looks like a gymnasium compared to that, as far as the size of the control room and the equipment that was there. So a lot to compare with. But the thing that just always impressed me was you could feel from the tremor of the ground and everything that there was massive power, and it had to be, to generate that much heat and have that much steam coming out of those millions of gallons. I don't know exactly what. The only thing that disturbed me, and I questioned it at the time, riding the bus going past the 200 East area, a lot of times the winds would bring down a brownish plume, and it'd come right in the bus, and your nose would burn. And I'd say, isn't that bad for you? Why is it on a big stack and it's coming down here? And oh, nothing to worry about. Well, thank God I don't think I ever got anything from it. But there was a lot of things that went on that you could question, but you probably wouldn't get much for an answer. In fact, when I could bounce around on things when I was doing the weather system for them. In the wintertime, we were given snowmobiles because we did Rattlesnake Mountain and the whole bit. And so we had, they had their own trailer with the snowmobiles. Well, I had to go into the two west area, and immediately this one guard, he must have been new, he's, pull over there and don't go anywhere. I thought, well, this is new. And he comes up, he says, sir, I hate to tell you this, but you can't be bringing your recreational vehicles in here. And I said, sir, would you mind reading what's on those snowmobiles and read what's on the trailer? It says, property of the Atomic Energy Commission. He looks at it, he thought it was crazy. He's, well, I'm sorry. So you're all the time being tested. But in general, I always considered it as probably one of the greatest experiences. I'm really thankful to the good Lord that I worked 44 and a half years. I'm not trying to brag, but I was never unemployed. They kept me plenty busy.
sounds like it. It sounds like you had many different jobs.
Well, with instrumentation and monitoring everything under the sun, temperature, pressure, level, and et cetera. Even one of them that reminded me, not to go on and on and on, but in the 300 area while I was down there, they sent me to this so-called bursting facilities. And I thought, now what the heck's that? Well, we'll find out. I go there and they have these different cells and they had high pressure systems and they take different materials of piping and they hook up all this apparatuses on both ends and they put it in a cell and put on all kinds of monitoring equipment, pressure, temperature, and etc. And what they do when they get ready to test, you get out of there and you go back in the control room and they run up until that pipe virtually breaks open. And again, for studies, but they had a lot of studies going on before they ever used a lot of material. So it was, like I say, always exciting. I enjoyed it, but you never knew what you were going to be assigned with, and it seemed like they didn't mind sending me around.
Sounds like it. I wonder if I could have you talk just a little bit about starting in the 60s and then having this great 44-year career on Hanford. Certainly the technology changed a great deal in that time. Could you talk a little bit about what sorts of technology changes you encountered working there?
Well, sure. It's sort of interesting when they first put me out in the 300 area. Of course, I was assigned with different technicians almost every day, and anyway, this one technician, and you get sense when right off the bat, well, you're a fresh one from out of school, so you probably don't know much or anything. And this, I was given this elderly gentleman, and he takes me to his own little shop area he had, and in fact, it happened to be where the bursting facilities was. And he says, "What do you know about recorders?" I says, "Well, I was thinking of electronic recorders, magnetic tape type recorder." I says, "Well, if you're talking about magnetic tape recorders," I says, "I think I know quite a bit about them. What do you got?" He says, "Well, what do you know about recorders? What do you know about L&N recorder?" And I says, "Not a thing. Can you show me what you're talking about?" He brings out this great big heavy old chunk of iron. It's a L&N recorder. It has a galvanometer movement in it. I knew what that was, but I thought, what do you do with that piece of junk? I'd use it for a boat anchor. But I didn't say that because I knew it would disrupt him a lot. He says, "Do you know how to calibrate or wind your own resistors for the bridge that it requires for it?" I said, "No." I said, "You give me a formula, I'll work it out." He says, "Great." So he gives me what values he wanted, how to calculate. So then he hands me this spool and this wire. He says, "All right, make your own resistor." I said, "What is this?" And he says, "You got to make your own resistor." So I kept going down the wire until I got exactly the resistance, cut it off. Then I had to treat it and the whole thing. I just followed along with him, and I made these several spools of resistors and put it in. And then he had me take and apply a signal to see where the galvanometer would move. And the whole thing, I was, how antiquated can this get? He didn't like it too well or anything, but I thought I can learn something from everybody. And it was really interesting because as I got out into the K reactors, well, now they had all, at that time, they had vacuum tube amplifiers, and yes, they had their own bridge circuits and stuff, but you didn't go winding your own resistors or anything. In fact, it all came from the factory, pre-certified, etc. And so I saw a big change there, and the counting type equipment and the measuring of temperature, things changed tremendously. Now, in the pneumatic end, that's air-driven instruments, which I never really was fond of. I liked electronics. It was a lot faster. Air-driven, even though that is very accurate for monitoring pressure and the whole thing, is very slow. You make a move, you wait. Electronics, it's right there. And that was a big change I've seen. And of course, as they got, especially like that K reactor, so much more massive and everything, they had to be a lot more sophisticated. And so I could see one heck of a change in poor old B reactor was about as old-fashioned as you could get. But it amazes me how they handled the whole thing from the ground up, and we didn't have any major catastrophe. They did have at K reactors, and I didn't realize the possible danger was in. They did have where the core did catch on fire, and at least with the monitoring equipment they had, it was where they could respond fast enough to start changing control rods, but it took them a while to get that out. But at least it wasn't like Chernobyl. Chernobyl, they had no chance. In fact, we had videos of it, and I'm jumping clear into where we were shown videos, the fact that when they cut off all the safety systems, they apparently had no knowledge how fast, when a chain reaction starts, how fast it can be when it goes critical, because it totally blew everything up. And that's with a graphite core, and unfortunately people think that, like Energy Northwest out there, that has water as a moderator. There's no graphite whatsoever, a whole different thing. And graphite does burn. And the sad thing is, I've heard that there wasn't a single person that was around Chernobyl that was trying to save the area that is alive today. At least, thank God, we do have a lot more safety concerns. But I don't know if I've totally answered what you're looking for between the difference, but it was a massive difference. Of course, then when I went over to Energy Northwest, the equipment as far as recorders, they didn't even have vacuum tubes. Everything's solid state, and pretty much current state of the art, or even making changes to be more current to the more current methods. So it always gave you a different challenge, but I like the changes, and I learned real quick. No matter who, you learn from everyone. And I know my first supervisor, he was sort of like a dad, and he'd after about 2 weeks there, he called me in. He says, "I see that you were really raised strict." I says, "Why do you say that?" And he says, "You don't let anyone disturb you, but you don't come back with any smart aleck remarks." I says, "Everyone's got something to offer, good or bad." I says, "I'm not here for that. I'm here to learn, and I'm here to carry out what you want me to carry out." But it was always exciting, and I have no regrets. In fact, most thought that I would never even quit when I quit when I was 66. I figured, well, maybe I should take time out to enjoy life, and so I'm glad that I did. I don't miss it. I never tried to think about retirement or play it into my mind until I think it was about the last day. I even went out and worked regular assignments till the last 4 hours, and then finally my boss says, "Well, come on in. There's no use going any further." And I thought, well, now I can lay everything down. I can walk out that gate and won't feel like I'm in a pen. So it was a great experience.
It sounds like it. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the K reactor shutdown. And I understand there was some talk of maybe starting it back up, and that ultimately didn't happen. Since you worked there. Right.
Well, I heard mostly about that, of course, when I was away from there, and I thought it was really, really a disappointment. It was really sad. In fact, I think it was pretty much getting into that process when I was down at Battelle, and they were doing some tests out there, and I got to go with an engineer. He wanted me to go out there and help with some equipment. And going in there, everything's stone cold, everything's stone quiet, such a massive structure, doing absolutely nothing. I thought, what a waste, and what are they going to do? And like I said, I didn't hear a whole lot about it, but it came and really hit home is when I went in there, and they're worried about rodents and everything else. That isn't the reactor that I saw, and the excitement that was behind it is just all was dead. And going back through some of the corridors and into one of the areas they were experimenting with, just hardly could see around, and they had some test equipment. I didn't question exactly what are they monitoring. I'm sure a lot they're looking for. Is there any possible contamination concerns or anything? But speaking of contamination concerns, it's just like when any of those reactors had what they call a rupture. That's where a fuel element breaks open and the material's going out into that water stream. And what they do is they'd immediately divert it to, they had a big open area, pit area, where all that high contaminated water went into. And guess what's out there in the wintertime? Ducks are swimming in that hot water. And I thought, I wouldn't eat anything around here. But I think there's quite a bit that substantiates all that. In fact, Battelle's doing a lot of research in animals and stuff, and even the materials that the feces material and everything is like up in the 5R range, which you wouldn't even want to be near that. And I thought, they got a lot to learn out there of studying the habitat around there, but I wouldn't want to eat anything. But again, I'm off on another subject.
That's okay. So overall, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about any aspects of your work that you found the most challenging, or sort of the most rewarding, or just kind of overall how Hanford was as a place to work during the time you were there.
Well, during the time I was there, as far as I was really impressed with General Electric, they always gave me a feeling of a positive attitude. Also a very strong feeling that you don't talk about your exact work because it's for the security of the country. And at the same token, I think where it became more rewarding and more relaxing to me is actually when I went to work out at that time, Whoops. And at that time, seeing all of the things that go into making a plant, you learn to respect things different. When I went to terminate from Battelle, they says, why in the heck do you want to go there? They're never going to ever operate. I says, well, I'm young enough yet. I want to see what I can learn out of it. And if it don't work, they says, if it don't work, come back here, we'll give you a job. And I thought, I'll bet you will. But I think maybe they were sincere, but I found it really rewarding there. I got involved with, and I never dreamt that I would, is working with robots for going into highly radioactive zones to do monitoring and to observe what's going on, like steam leaks or anything, so you're not putting anyone in any danger. Out of that, I was surprised. I got an award from, I can't even think of the name right now, from the company that was behind it. Was back east, and they sent a plaque award me that I contributed to something that basically made things safer that didn't expose man to. And yet I found it really exciting because I've always been excited about cameras, and this is working with cameras and with remote control of a little robot, and I made quite a few improvements in them. So I considered maybe that was one of the highlights of it was rewarding. I wasn't expecting anything. I just enjoyed that they let me go on it. And I also worked, I wore two hats in the last years at Energy Northwest, and that I volunteered because they couldn't get anyone else that would go there to write procedures. There was 5 originally that volunteered, and we all 5 took on the challenge, and inside of a couple months it was down about 2 of us, and it was fine. It ended up was down as basically myself, and the main reason is because you're writing the instructions for that technician to go out and perform a function. If that causes anything like dump the plant or any kind of danger, you go before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and you may be serving time. Well, to protect myself, I always went before engineering and discussed and made them put their name on the dotted line with me that yes, this is right, this is the only way to go about it, or the best way to go about it. And it was rewarding to me from the standpoint that if they needed an extra hand, they'd pull me right off of that, and I was back out on the plant. So I got away from it. Just continually, like I say, the challenges seemed to never end. And I really, for a while, thought, I don't know, maybe I won't quit. They always teased me that I would be there when they shut the lights out. Well, I'm glad I didn't, because getting away from it as you get older, different medical issues, but I'm still blessed with the fact that I can get around.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about, or that we haven't had a chance to hear you talk about, that you'd like to share? Any other sort of humorous incidents, or just anything that stands out in your mind from that time?
Well, it wasn't a humorous incident, but one thing that GE pointed out, well, I guess it was an incident as far as, and of course it was to teach everybody a lesson, is this one gentleman saw this real neat tool in his eyes, so he decided he'd take it home with him. It turns out it was a contaminated piece of equipment, and so when they detected it was missing, all they had to do was they got out their radiation monitors. They had an approximate idea they could go right to his doorstep, and they went in and they cut out chunks out of his carpet. Everywhere he'd been in his house, they were cutting out samples, and so I think it was a lesson well learned. Keep your hands off of it. But in a way, I thought it was sort of funny. It's not really funny though, but taking that kind of obviously carelessness, at least it really hit home. It isn't worth it.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, for general purposes, most of my students were born after the Cold War, right?
Right.
They don't remember this time. So what would you like sort of that generation or future generations to know about working at Hanford as this very important aspect of America's place in the Cold War and winning the Cold War?
Well, I think the main thing is the big thing is it's I'm just trying to figure out how to put it. Shouldn't be afraid of nuclear if you really know all the facts behind it and all of the precautions behind it. It gives one heck of a rewarding career, and it is something that I think I'm probably a whole lot healthier than a whole lot that I know of that have never had anything to do with nuclear, and yet my whole life basically has been out there, and it definitely is rewarding in regards to the financial side, as well as well, I can relate to my older son. When he was graduating, I says, well, what are you going to do? Because I never heard him discuss anything. He says, I'm going to be an instrument tech. I said, where did you get that idea? He says, well, I want to do like what you did, and I want to make the money you've made. And he went to Perry Tech, and he did real well. And I even, through my supervision, of course, was instrumental and got him on a few outages out here. But he went on down to the only place where he got a permanent job was, but again, instrumentation, similar type equipment for different purposes down at SCH, where it was making silicon wafers for all these integrated circuits. All the latest technology is a Japanese firm. They're very stern, very strict. Well, he had the most seniority and everything there. I think it was 12 and a half years. And when it came to layoff and cutbacks, because they're very competitive, he was one of the first ones to let go. Now to try to find work. Well, he's been able to get on to outages all throughout the country. So even though he's had nothing there, he's right now he's in Raleigh, North Carolina. A month ago he was down in Florida, and he's getting to see country that I haven't seen. And there's a lot of adventures yet, but he's still dealing with nuclear. It's definitely it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to respect. and I'd say it definitely has a lot of opportunity if a person really wants to make the good money. I know, like I say, it's what you can do with your hands. Of course, you have to use your head too, but there's opportunity that you can really do well.
I want to thank you very much for coming in and sharing your memories with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, I hope I've contributed something that's I enjoy talking about what I can talk about it. It's left me with memories I'll never forget, and
Right.
I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we're very happy to have you. I love your description of standing behind B reactor and looking down in those kind of cool glowing